The battlefield silenced the war was over, at least. That's what the silence said. The battlefield lay under a heavy, choking sky. Smoke drifted low, curling around broken machines and burned-out vehicles. The smell of metal, ash, and blood was so strong it seemed to stick to the back of the throat. Koresh lay face down in the dirt. Her armor, once shining with the colors of her warrior clan, was cracked and smeared with dark blood, some hers, some not. One arm refused to move. Her breathing came in sharp, shallow bursts. She could feel the cold ground under her cheek. And in the distance, the occasional boom of falling debris. She didn't know how long she had been lying there. Minutes, hours, days. Her unit had been wiped out before her eyes. She remembered the screams, the blinding explosions, the burning sky. She had fought until her body gave up, until her blade slipped from her fingers. And when her vision blurred, she had thought, so this is how a warrior dies. Her people had no word for surrender. There was only victory or death, now. With her body broken and the cold creeping into her bones, death felt close, so close she could almost taste it. She let her eyes close. No one would come for her. Not from her own side. Not from the humans. Not from anyone. But then, she felt something warmth. Hands dashed to hands, slipped under her shoulders, and lifted her with surprising gentleness. Her instincts flared for a moment. Her body had no strength to fight. Her vision swam, shapes and light mixing into one another. But she could tell it wasn't an enemy in black armor. Through the haze, she saw a face. Human face. A man not young, but not old, weathered, with stubble on his jaw and eyes that didn't look cruel. His hair was messy, his clothing torn, but he moved with quick, careful purpose. "You're still breathing," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "All right, you're coming with me." His voice was calm, deep, steady. She didn't understand all his words, her knowledge. The human tongue was limited, but she understood the tone. It wasn't the voice of someone about to finish her. Off, he pulled her up into his arms. She was heavier than most humans, but he didn't hesitate. His heartbeat thudded against her as he carried her. Moving fast over uneven ground, her head rested against his shoulder. And she could smell him sweat, dirt, and the faint scent of something sweet. Maybe dried fruit. Every few seconds, he glanced around, as if expecting something to leap from the shadows. They passed what had once been a road. Now, it was nothing but broken stone and shattered glass. She saw burned alien banners, half buried in dust. A few black-armored bodies lay, twisted and still. The man didn't look at them. He kept moving. Koresh's eyelids grew heavy again. She thought about letting go, slipping into the dark where there was no more pain. But something in the way he held her made her pause. He was protecting her. Her. A stranger. A member of a species that most humans feared. Why? She tried to speak, but her lips only managed a whisper. The words came out in her language, a soft rasp. "Why save me?" He either didn't understand or chose not to answer. He just shifted her weight in his arms and said something else in his tongue. "Stay awake. Just stay with me." Her head turned slightly, and she caught a glimpse of something ahead, small. Half-collapsed building, its doorway hidden by a sheet of metal. He pushed through, carrying her inside. The air was cooler here, smelling of dust and old wood. He set her down on a low bed made of blankets and crates. Her vision blurred again, but she could feel him removing pieces of her broken armor. Checking the worst wounds. Cold cloth pressed against her side. Her body jerked in pain, and she let out a low growl. He didn't flinch. He just murmured something, soft, like a reassurance. Then came the sound of tearing fabric. He was making bandages. Koresh felt strange. She had been treated for wounds before, always by her own medics, always in the heat of battle. But this was different. This was slow, deliberate care, as if her life actually mattered. She tried to keep her eyes open, to watch him. His hands moved with a soldier's steadiness. He didn't waste time, but he wasn't rough. Every touch was precise. Finally, he sat back, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked at her, and for a moment they simply stared at each other. Koresh saw no hatred. There no fear. Just determination, and that was the last thing she remembered before her eyes closed, and darkness took her again. Somewhere in the deep haze of her mind, she thought, if I wake again, I will find out who he is. Asterisk, the humans shelter Koresh woke to a soft, steady sound. Drip, drip. Water, somewhere. Water was falling into a metal pan. She opened her eyes. A low ceiling of dark beams. A cracked wall. Shelves made from old crates. A small lamp glowed on a table. Its light, warm and gentle. The air smelled like clean cloth, wood dust, and herbs. Her chest hurt. Her side burned. Her arm felt heavy. Wrapped tight, she tried to lift it. Pain shot up to her neck. She hissed and stopped. Easy, a voice said. The human stepped into the light. She recognized the same face from the battlefield, the one who had carried her. He had washed the dirt from his skin, but his eyes still held the same tired focus. He wore a simple brown jacket with torn sleeves. A strip of cloth was tied around his wrist like a band. He held a cup. Steam rose from it. "You're awake," he said. He set the cup near her. Small sips. Koresh pushed herself up on one elbow, slow and careful. The mattress under her was a pile of blankets over wooden pallets. Not soft, but not the ground. She glanced at the walls. One side was a rough door half covered by a hanging sheet of metal. The other side had a window boarded from the inside. A thread of daylight leaked around the boards. Where? She managed an halting human standard. "Safe," he said. For now, he crouched and helped lift the cup to her lips. The drink was thin, broth salty, warm, and full of tiny leaf bits. It slid down her dry throat like rain on cracked earth. "I am Koresh," she said, each word slow, as if she had to pull it through fire. He nodded. "Daniel." She repeated it softly. "Daniel." He smiled, just a little. Close enough. She looked at her armor, stacked near the table. The chest plate was dented in 2 places. The side panel was split, edges black with heat. Her clan mark was scratched and almost gone. "My unit?" she asked. Daniel's jaw tightened. He shook. His head once, no. Silence stretched. Koresh lowered her eyes. A warrior did not cry before strangers. She focused on small things, the lamp flame, the line of cracks in the wall, the drip of water into the pan. Each detail kept her from falling into the hole opening inside her chest. Outside, an engine rumbled far away, then another. She stilled. Listening. Daniel listened to. He moved to the door, pressed his ear to the metal, waited, and then returned. "Patrols," he said. "They sweep the southern blocks every morning now." "Your people?" she asked. He shook his head again. "Not mine. Hired guns. Black armor. They don't ask who you are. They just clear what's left." Koresh closed her hand into a fist. Her claws pressed against her palm wrap. "They hunted us," she said. "They burned our wounded." "I know," he answered quietly. She studied. He spoke like someone who had seen it up close. He moved like someone who had been trained to move without sound. His hands were steady in a way that did not come from peace. "You are soldier," she said. "Was," Daniel replied. "Not anymore." He checked the bandage at her side. "This will hold," he said. "But if you tear it, you bleed out fast. You stand only with help today. Tomorrow, maybe on your own. No hero moves." Koresh breathed out slowly. Her mind ran fast. She was in enemy town ruins. She was in a human shelter. She was alive because a human had lifted her from death. Her training said, do not trust, do not stay, do not depend. But her body said, you cannot run. She tested her legs. They trembled. Pride made her try to sit straighter. The room tilted. She gripped the blanket until the tilt stopped. Daniel watched without comment. He pulled a crate closer and sat. I will not be your prisoner, she said, meeting his eyes. You're not, he said. Door isn't locked. If you can walk, you can go. But if you step outside now, patrols hear you, and then both of us die here. His words were flat. Not a threat, a fact. Koresh glanced at the door again. In the dim lamplight, she noticed lines scratched into the wood beam above the table, small marks, groups of 5. Days, meals, deaths, she could not tell. Daniel stood and moved to the shelves. He took down a small tin and a roll of clean cloth. He cut a piece, then showed her the tin. Inside was a green paste. Herb salve, he said. My grandmother's recipe. Works on burns. Might work on you. Different blood, Koresh warned. He nodded, still calm. We'll try a little. He dabbed a tiny bit on the edge of her wound, not touching the deeper cut. It cooled the skin like water on hot stone. She waited for the bite of poison. For the burning shock, it did not come. He watched her face. Any sting? No, she said. Cold. Good, he said, and wrapped the bandage again. His fingers worked quick and sure. When he finished, he slid the empty tin back into its place. She noticed. This was a shelter built by someone who had learned to live with little. Why? She asked the question from the battlefield, finally clawing. Its way out. Why save me? Daniel looked at the boards over the window. Light drew thin lines across his face. Because you were still breathing, he said. Because they would not have stopped to ask your name. Because I've seen enough last breaths. His voice was steady, but something in it was tired, like a door that had been opened and closed too many times. Koresh studied him. In her culture, names were shared with care. Life debts were written in blood. She felt both pulling at her, heavy as chain and warm as fire. Then oh no, he cut in, gentle but firm. You don't owe me, you heal. Then you choose. She leaned back, surprised by that answer. She had met humans on the battlefield, loud, fast, full of heat and thunder. This one was quiet. He gave her a choice. It set something new inside her chest, like a small light. The rumble of engines grew again, closer this time. A sharp metallic chirp echoed from the street scanner ping. Daniel stood at once. He reached under the table and pulled out a short rifle wrapped in cloth. He checked a chamber, then set it leaning near the door. Stay down, he said softly. Koresh swung her feet from the pallet. Pain flared white, but she clenched her teeth. If the patrol came in, she would not be found lying helpless. She reached for her blade hilt out of habit and found only empty air. Her blade lay across the room, cleaned, propped like a respectful guest on 2 crates. Daniel noticed her look. He crossed the room fast and placed the blade within reach. Don't use it unless you must, he said. Sound carries. She nodded once. Respect answered respect. He moved to the door again and lifted the metal sheet an inch to peer into the gap. He froze, then lowered it slowly. How many? She whispered. 3, he said. Maybe 4. 1 scanner, 1 torch. There. Checking doors. A bright cone of light passed across the crack in the boards and moved on. Boots scraped grit. A helmet radio hissed. Koresh's heart pounded hard enough to hurt. She kept her breath quiet and shallow. counting in her head to keep fear from shaking her limbs. The boots stopped outside the door. Daniel looked back at her. His eyes met hers. No panic, only a silent question. Ready? Koresh curled her claws around. The blade hilt. Her body still trembled, but her mind was clear now. She was a warrior. She had bled and lived. She would not fold. The door handle rattled. Metal knocked against metal. Inspection. A voice barked from outside. Daniel lifted a finger to his lips. The handle turned. The door pushed against the hanging sheet. It scraped. Slow. Light knifed into the room through the crack. Koresh drew one breath and held it. The drip, drip. Drip of water was now the only sound inside. The door began to open. Asterisk the bond forms. The door froze, halfway open. From outside, one of the soldiers muttered something Koresh couldn't catch. The sheet of metal rattled again, then slowly the door shut, boots crunched away. She kept her grip on the blade, listening for any trick. Daniel stayed at the door, watching the crack until the sound faded into the distance. Only then did he lower the metal sheet and turn back to her. They didn't check inside, he said, voice low. We got lucky. Koresh's shoulders relaxed. But her claws stayed wrapped around the hilt. Luck doesn't last, she said in her rough human standard. No, Daniel agreed. That's why we plan. He crossed the room and poured water from a dented jug into a tin cup. He set it next to her, and she took it without thanks. Not because she didn't mean it, but because in her culture, thanks were only spoken after a life debt was paid. Until then, gratitude was shown in actions. The water was cold. She drank it all in 3 gulps. When she set the cup down, Daniel was watching her not with suspicion, but with a kind of quiet study. How long since you last ate? He asked. She thought for a moment. 2 suns ago. He pulled a cloth bundle from a shelf and unwrapped it to reveal flatbread and strips of dried meat. The smell made her stomach tighten painfully. He handed her the bread first, then tore a piece of the meat for himself. You share food, she said, surprised. That's what people do, he replied. Not in war, she answered, breaking the bread with her claws. He gave a small shrug. I'm not at war with you. The bread was coarse but warm, probably heated on the lamp. She ate in silence, her mind tracing the edges of this strange human's behavior. He did not demand she give up her weapon. He did not ask for secrets. He simply kept her alive. When she finished, she leaned back against the wall. You are soldier, she said again. Was, Daniel replied. He pulled a small box from under the table. Inside were rounds for his rifle, each cleaned and placed in rows. Long time ago, different flag. She tilted her head. You fight for coin. Once, he said. Then for survival. Now, just to keep a roof over my head. And yet, you save me. His hands paused over the box for a moment. Because? When I found you, no one else would have bothered. I've seen enough bodies left to rot. Koresh studied him in the lamplight. His words were simple, but there was weight behind them. A history she didn't yet know. The lamp flickered. A gust of wind slipped through a crack in the boards. Carrying the faint smell of ash from outside, Daniel noticed her shiver and pulled another blanket from the corner. He tossed it to her. Wrap up, your body's still fighting the shock. She hesitated, then took it. It smelled faintly of pine and smoke. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was steady. Almost like a camp before battle, when every soldier knew they needed to rest, but stayed alert for the first sign of movement. Koresh thought of her clan. If any of them had survived, they would have come by now. In her heart, she knew the truth. They were gone. This human was the only living being she had spoken to in days. Her voice dropped lower. In my culture, she said, to carry someone from the field is to claim them. You understand this? Daniel looked up from his rifle. A claim. Them how? As your responsibility, until they can walk again. He leaned back in his chair. Guess that makes me responsible for you then. The words weren't meant to sting, but they did. She had never needed someone's care before. Now she depended on it. You regret? She asked, testing him. His answer came without hesitation. No. That surprised her. He leaned forward. But if you stay here, you have to learn to move quiet. Keep little. Keep your weapon close. She gave a slow nod. You will teach me human gun. You can handle it. He asked. I can learn. That was the first moment their bond began to form, not from kindness alone, but from the shared language of fighters. The next day, Daniel placed the rifle in her hands. It was lighter than the plasma rifle she had trained with, but the balance was different. She held it awkwardly at first. Shouldered it, he instructed. He stepped behind her, adjusting her stance. His hands guided her elbows, shifted her grip, and nudged her feet into position. The closeness was strange. No human had ever stood so near without threat in his posture. She could feel his breath near her ear. Good, he said quietly. Keep both eyes open. Squeeze, don't jerk. They practiced without live rounds, just aiming at knots in the wood wall. Each time she improved, his short nod of approval felt like a small victory. When they rested, she showed him her own blade technique. She guided his hands on the hilt, corrected his footing, and demonstrated the sweep that could knock a weapon aside without killing. He was quick to learn. Too quick. She began to suspect he had trained with blades before. That night, Koresh woke. To the sound of his footsteps, Daniel was sitting by the door, rifle across his knees, staring into the dark crack beneath the sheet of metal. She sat up. Trouble? Not yet, he said. But patrols came closer tonight. I could hear their radios. Koresh tightened her grip on the blanket. If they find us, we fight, he said simply. Her claws flexed. Then we fight together. Their eyes met in the dim glow of the lamp. For a brief moment, Koresh felt something she hadn't. Since before the war, a certainty that someone would stand beside her when the enemy came. She lay back down, but didn't sleep right away. Her thoughts circled around one truth. She had entered this shelter a dying soldier. But slowly, she was becoming something else. Someone connected to a human in a way she had never expected. And she knew it was only a matter of time before that bond would be tested. Enemy at the door. The morning started quiet to quiet. Koresh had learned to read Daniel's moods by now. He was a man who could drink his tea with gunfire in the distance and not flinch. But today, his eyes kept darting to the window boards. Every small sound outside made his shoulders tense. You hear something? She said. Engines, he replied, voice clipped. More than usual, she listened. At first, only the hum of wind between the broken walls reached her ears. Then faint. At first, then growing, she heard it. The deep, heavy rumble of troop carriers. The sharper growl of scout bikes. And under it all, the faint, high-pitched whine of scanners. Daniel was already moving. He packed the food scraps, swept the floor with his boot to erase tracks, and pulled a thick blanket from a corner. Cover yourself with this, he said. Looks like old junk from a distance. She bristled. You hide me like prey? I hide you like someone they'd kill on sight, he said sharply. That silenced her. She pulled the rough blanket over herself, lying back on the pallet so only her eyes showed. The engines grew louder. Somewhere nearby, a man barked orders through a helmet speaker. Boots thudded on broken stone. A metallic clang echoed someone kicking in a door. Daniel moved to the front, lifting the sheet of metal just enough to peek outside. His body went still. He lowered it quickly. They're here, he said. How many? She whispered. 7. He said, 2 with scanners, one with a torch. Rest armed. The sound of boots came closer. Shadows moved past the window crack. A beam of white light swept across the boards, pausing for a heartbeat. Then moved on. Koresh tightened her grip on her blade beneath the blanket. Her muscles tensed despite the ache in her side. Then came the knock. Not a polite tap, a sharp, metallic thud that rattled the door. Inspection. A voice barked. Daniel didn't answer. Another thud. Louder. We know you're in there. He glanced back at her. His eyes said, "Stay down." The door handle rattled. Then the sheet of metal shifted, scraping against the floor. Koresh's heart pounded. She slid the blanket aside, just enough to free her arm. Her claws wrapped around her blade hilt. The door opened a hand's width, letting in a slice of light. Through it, Koresh saw the glint of black armor. "Hold on," Daniel called. Finally speaking. "What's the problem?" A soldier stepped forward, visor reflecting the lamplight. Routine check. Orders from command: anyone harboring enemy survivors will be executed. Daniel stepped into the doorway, blocking their view inside. Got nothing but dust and rats. The soldier tilted his head. "Mind if we look?" "Not really in the mood for company," Daniel said. His voice was calm. Almost lazy, but Koresh knew him well enough now to hear the steel under it. Another soldier stepped up, this one with a scanner in hand. A soft electronic chirp pulsed as the device swept left to right. Daniel shifted just enough to block the beam from reaching her corner. "This place is falling apart. You'll bring the whole wall down if you start poking around." The first soldier chuckled darkly. Maybe that's the idea. For a moment, Koresh thought. They'd forced their way in. Her body coiled, ready to strike despite the weakness still clinging to her limbs. Then a voice called from outside. "Move it. Eastern sector needs backup." The soldiers exchanged glances. The one with the scanner lowered it. "You get a pass. Today, old man. But if we find out you're hiding one of them..." He tapped the edge of his rifle. "We won't knock next time." They stepped back. Boots crunched away. Engines roared to life, growing fainter with distance. Daniel stayed in the doorway until they were gone. Only then did he drop the metal sheet back into place and exhale slowly. Koresh sat up, pushing the blanket aside. "You risk for me," she said. "I told you," he replied. "I'm not letting them take you." Her eyes narrowed. "Even if it kills you." He met her gaze. "Without flinching. Especially if it kills me." For a long moment, neither spoke. The weight of his words settled in the room like dust after an explosion. Later, when the engines were far away, Daniel pulled his rifle apart on the table and began cleaning it. Koresh sat across from him, sharpening her blade with slow, deliberate strokes. "They will come back," she said. "Then we'll be ready," he answered. "You fight beside me." He looked up from the rifle. "Beside you, not in front or behind. That work for you?" Her lips curved into something that might have been a smile, though it held no softness. "It works." That night, the air felt heavier. The city outside was too still. Koresh found herself unable to sleep. She sat near the window, watching the thin lines of moonlight leaking through the cracks. Daniel joined her, setting a tin mug of hot tea in front of her. "Drink. Helps with the night chill." She took it, feeling the heat seep into her claws. "You trust me not to stab you when you sleep," she said. "If you wanted me dead, you'd have done it already," he replied simply. She drank the tea. It was bitter, but the warmth spread through her chest. "Daniel," she said, after a moment, "in my people's way. When to fight together, they are bound. They share not just battle, but fate." He studied her in the dim light. "Is that your way of telling me we're bound now?" She didn't answer directly. She only met his eyes and said, when they come next time. We end it. No more hiding. His smile was small but certain. Then let's make sure we're ready. Outside, far away, an engine rumbled again. This time, Koresh didn't feel fear. She felt the steady weight of the blade at her side, and the knowledge that when the door opened next time, she wouldn't be facing it alone. The first stand together the next morning. The air carried the promise of trouble. The streets outside were quiet, not the ordinary quiet of a ruined city, but the kind that felt like everything was holding its breath. Daniel had noticed too. He wasn't a man who wasted words in the morning, but now he was even quieter than usual. He checked the rifle, the ammo box, the water supply, and then started packing food into a small satchel. Koresh watched from the pallet, her side still aching, but her strength finally returning. She'd been able to stand yesterday without help. Today, she intended to do more than stand. "You prepared to leave?" she asked. "Prepare for options," Daniel said. "If the patrols change their routes, we go. If they come here, we fight." His voice was steady, but his movements were sharp, too sharp. He was expecting something. Koresh swung her legs to the floor. The cold boards bit against her feet, but she ignored it. She walked to the table where her armor lay. The chest plate was still cracked, but the arm and shin guards were intact enough to wear. She strapped them on, ignoring the flare of pain when she tightened the buckles. Daniel looked up from his rifle. "You sure you're ready for that?" She didn't answer, just reached for her blade and began checking its edge. The morning passed. In quiet work, Daniel taught her the basics of his rifle, how to load, aim, fire, and clear a jam. It was different from the energy weapons she knew. But the logic of combat was the same. Strike first, strike true. "Don't waste a shot. You'll get one magazine," he told her. "If you use it all and we're still breathing, we switch." "2 blades." She nodded. "I will not waste them." When they broke for food, she offered him a piece of dried meat from her own pouch. In her culture, that was more than a gesture, was a sign that she considered him part of her unit. Daniel accepted without comment, but she caught the faintest lift at the corner of his mouth. By midday, they decided to test her speed. The shelter's back door opened into a narrow alley half filled with rubble. Daniel set a series of broken bottles along a wall and handed her the rifle. "Targets," he said simply. She stepped into the alley. The air smelled of dust and old smoke. She braced the rifle, aimed, and squeezed the trigger. The crack echoed. Between the walls, the bottle shattered. Her claws clicked against the rifle's frame as she adjusted her grip and took the next shot. Another hit. Daniel's voice came from behind her. "Good. Now move." They repeated the drill with her shifting positions after each shot, ducking behind a broken wall, stepping over debris, rolling to a crouch. Her side pulled with every movement, but she kept going. Finally, Daniel called, "Enough." She lowered the rifle and turned. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes said enough. He was impressed. "You're ready," he said. "Ready enough, anyway." That night, they sat at the table, sharpening blades. Koresh had given Daniel a few pointers on handling hers, and in turn, he showed her how to make a rifle stock double as a blunt weapon. At one point, she paused. "Daniel," she said quietly, "your people fight for many reasons, land coin. Orders? Why do you fight now?" He looked at the edge of his knife for a long moment before answering. "Because I've seen what happens when you don't." She didn't push for more. She knew the look in his eyes, that weight came from losses, too deep to be told in one night. The next day brought their test. It started with a distant hum. Both of them froze, listening. It grew louder, multiple engines, moving fast. Then came the grinding roar of a heavy vehicle. Daniel grabbed the rifle and tossed her the second one. "Positions," he said. Koresh moved to the back alley window, crouching low. Daniel took the front door, peering through a narrow slit in the boards. The engine stopped close to close. Boots hit the ground. Voices barked orders. A metallic clank rang out as something heavy was set against a wall. "They're sweeping." "This block," Daniel whispered. 2 minutes. Koresh's heart thudded. But it wasn't the wild fear from before. It was a steady drumbeat, the call before battle. She glanced toward him. He gave a small nod. The first shadow appeared at the window. Koresh squeezed the trigger. The glass cracked, and the figure dropped with a strangled cry. Shouts erupted. Daniel fired from the front, dropping the lead soldier. In the street. The others scrambled for cover. "They know we're here," Koresh shouted. "Then we keep them outside." Daniel replied. She fired again, forcing 2 soldiers back behind a wall. Daniel moved from the door to the window, firing between her shots to keep pressure on them. Their rhythm was instinctive cover, move, strike. A grenade clinked against the floor. Koresh lunged, kicked it back through the window before it could arm. It exploded in the street, scattering debris and smoke. Through the haze, she saw movement, one soldier trying to flank the back. She vaulted over the crates, landed in the alley, and met him with her blade. A quick sidestep, a strike to his weapon arm, and he dropped his rifle. She finished him with a sharp blow to the helmet. Sending him to the ground, Daniel's rifle cracked twice more. And the street went quiet. Only the wind moved now. Carrying the acrid scent of gunpowder and burned metal, Koresh returned to the shelter, her blade streaked with dust and oil. Daniel was leaning against the doorframe, breathing hard but grinning faintly. "You fight well," she said. "You too," he answered. For the first time, they stood together in the doorway, looking out at the empty street. And in that moment, Koresh knew something had changed, no longer just a human and an alien hiding from the same enemy, but 2 warriors who had stood shoulder to shoulder and lived. Asterisk. The battle for survival, the victory was short, lived by the time Daniel had reloaded and Koresh had cleaned her blade. The distant hum returned louder, heavier. This wasn't a scout patrol. It was a hunting force. Daniel peered through the window crack. "They're bringing an armored carrier," he said. "And more troops." Koresh joined him, her claws curling tight around the blade hilt. "How many?" "Too many to run from," he answered. "At least a dozen." Her pulse stayed steady. The fight earlier had woken something inside her. The warrior that had been lying broken was now fully awake. "Then we make them pay for every step," she said. Daniel nodded once. "We hold here. Use the choke points." They moved quickly. Daniel shoved crates and scrap metal against the doors, leaving only narrow firing lanes. Koresh overturned a table in the center of the room to create a second barricade. They checked ammunition to full magazines for Daniel's rifle. 1 for hers, plus their blades. The hum of engines swelled into a roar. The ground trembled as the carrier stopped in front of the building. Boots hit the ground in unison. A voice barked from outside, amplified through a helmet speaker. "This is your last warning. Surrender any enemy survivors, and you may live." Daniel leaned close to Koresh. "If they breach, stay behind cover until I draw their fire." She bared her teeth. "No, we fight side by side." The front door shuddered under a heavy impact once, twice. On the third, the old hinges screamed and splintered. A soldier in black armor burst through. Rifle up. Daniel fired first. The soldier fell. Koresh swung to cover the side window. Second soldier climbed through. She met him halfway, her blade flashing, striking the joint between armor plates. He collapsed without a sound. More poured in 3 at once from the front. Daniel dropped one, Koresh took another, and the third. Dived behind cover, firing blindly. Bullets ripped splinters from the table. Left flank. Daniel called. Koresh rolled across the floor, came up behind a crate, and fired through the gap. The soldier on the left went down, his weapon clattering on the boards. Then came the sharp hiss of gas grenades rolling across the floor. Mask! Daniel shouted, tossing her a cloth soaked in vinegar water. She tied it around her mouth and nose, the acrid temps burning her throat. Visibility dropped as white fog filled the room. Shadows moved within its fast, low shapes. Koresh swung her blade, felt it catch on armor, then kick free. Daniel's rifle cracked again and again. Each shot a flash in the haze. A soldier lunged from the fog, tackling Koresh to the floor. Her blade skittered out of reach. The weight on her chest pressed the air from her lungs. She clawed at his visor, raking deep gouges until glass cracked. With a heave, she rolled them over, grabbed a fallen weapon, and drove it into the weak seam at his neck. She staggered back to her feet, blood pounding in her ears. Through the smoke, she saw Daniel pinned against the far wall by two soldiers. One was driving a knee into his chest, while the other swung the butt of a rifle toward his head. Without thinking, Koresh charged. She slammed into the nearest soldier, knocking him away from Daniel. The second turned just in time to meet her. Blade. Daniel coughed hard, pulling himself upright. Still breathing, he rasped. Stay that way, she snapped. Moving back to cover the front. The carrier outside revved its engine. A heavy thud shook the floor-ram prep. They're going to take the wall down, Daniel said grimly. Koresh's eyes flicked to the crates piled against the front. Then we make this our last line. When the wall blew inward, dust and debris filled the air. A flood of black-armored soldiers surged forward. Daniel switched to short bursts, cutting down the lead attackers. Koresh moved in a deadly rhythm strike. Step, block, thrust. They fought back to back, turning and moving as one, covering each. Others blind spots. Her side burned where the wound reopened, but she ignored it. Daniel's breath grew ragged, yet he didn't falter. For every soldier they dropped, two more came. The floor was slick now, boots slipping. Smoke and dust stung her eyes. Then finally a sound that made her chest tighten. The sharp call of a retreat order. The remaining soldiers fell back toward the carrier. Dragging their wounded, Daniel leaned against the wall, sweat running down. His face. We held. Koresh stood over the barricade, chest heaving, blade dripping. She scanned the street. The carrier was reversing, its engine whining, before turning down the ruined road. Only silence remained. Daniel sank into a chair, pressing a hand to his ribs. Not bad for two people who met a few days ago. Koresh knelt in front of him, checking the bruises already forming along his side. You are lucky I was here. Pretty sure it works both ways, he said, with a tired grin. She met his gaze, and for the first time since she'd been carried from the battlefield, she let the words come. Daniel, I trust you. It was not a small thing for her to say. In her culture, trust was harder to give than life itself. He nodded slowly. Then we'll keep each other alive. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying away the last traces of smoke. But both of them knew the fight wasn't over. This was just the first wave. And next time, the enemy wouldn't just come to kill. They'd come to finish what they started. A warrior's oath. The night after the battle, the city lay under a strange stillness. No engines, no boots, no gunfire. Only the whisper of wind through the hollow shells of buildings. Inside the shelter, the air was heavy with the smell of spent gunpowder and blood. The barricades were still in place, furniture overturned. Bullet holes marking the walls. Daniel sat against the far wall, one hand pressed to his side. His breathing was uneven. The fight had cost him more than he'd let. Koresh crouched beside him, her claws working to peel away the blood-soaked cloth over his ribs. Hold still, she ordered. "I'm fine," he said through gritted teeth. She looked at him sharply. "I have heard that lie from many warriors. Most did not live long after speaking it." His attempted smirk faded. He winced as she tightened. A fresh bandage. Outside, faint movement caught her air, a pebble shifting, a creak of metal. She froze, head tilting toward the sound. Daniel noticed instantly. More of them? She didn't answer. She stood, blade in hand, and moved to the doorway. A shadow moved across the rubble outside, quick and low. Too quick for scavengers. Koresh turned back to Daniel. "Stay down." He was already forcing himself upright. Not a chance. She opened her mouth to argue, but the first burst of gunfire cut her off. A figure in black armor appeared at the window, rifle aimed. Koresh's body moved before thought. She lunged, slamming into Daniel and forcing him to the ground as the wall splintered above them. The next second was a blur. She rolled to her feet, blade flashing, closing the gap to the attacker. A quick slash at the rifle barrel sent it spinning away, and a second strike caught the soldier across the chest plate, driving him back through the window frame. Another shadow burst through the back entrance. Daniel fired, the shot echoing sharp. In the small space, the intruder fell, armor clattering against the boards. More boots, more shadows. The enemy had split their force this time, coming from both sides. Koresh moved fast, cutting down one in the doorway, pivoting to block another's swing. Pain flared in her side, but she didn't slow. She caught a glimpse of Daniel. Out of the corner of her eye, he had dropped the rifle to grab a fallen soldier's weapon, firing in short, controlled bursts. His stance was tight, efficient, even hurt. He fought like someone who had done this 1,000 times before. A soldier broke past Koresh's guard, swinging the butt of his weapon toward Daniel's head. She shouted a warning, but it was too late. The blow connected, and Daniel crumpled against the wall. Her vision narrowed. She roared a raw, guttural sound that seemed to shake the air, launched herself at the attacker. Her blade found the gap under his arm, and he dropped instantly. The fight was over in seconds, but the silence afterward felt louder than the battle. Koresh dropped to her knees beside Daniel. His eyes were closed, blood running from a cut above his temple. She pressed her hand to his chest, still breathing, but shallow. She worked quickly, dragging him to the pallet and propping his head on a folded blanket. She cleaned the cut, her claws trembling despite her steady breathing. "Do not die," she murmured in her own language. "Not after I have chosen you." She sat with him through the long hours until dawn, changing the cloth on his head each time the blood soaked through. At some point, she realized her claws were resting lightly on his hand, as if holding him there by will alone. When the first light crept through the cracks in the boards, Daniel stirred. His eyes opened slowly, squinting against the pale glow. "You stayed," he rasped. "I carried you from the fight," she said simply. "As you once carried me," he blinked at her. "Guess we're even now." She shook her head. "No, this is not a debt to be balanced. This is a bond to be honored." He frowned slightly, still fogged from the blow. "Bond, in my people's way," she said. "When one saves another's life twice, once in flesh, once in spirit, they are bound until death. My life is yours to protect. Your life is mine to guard. This is the warrior's oath." She placed her clawed hand over his chest. "Do you accept it?" He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes clearer now. "Yeah," he said at last. "I accept." She leaned back, a rare softness crossing her face. "Then we will stand together. Always." They spent the rest of the morning repairing the barricades, moving in silence except for the scrape of wood and the clink of nails. Every now and then, Daniel would glance at her as if seeing her differently now. She noticed, but said nothing. By midday, the shelter looked fortified again. Though the walls bore scars that could never be patched completely, Koresh stood in the doorway, scanning the empty street. "They will come again," she said. Daniel stepped beside her, rifle in hand. "Then we'll be ready." She turned to him, and in her language words he did not yet understand, she spoke the final part of the oath. "My blade is your shadow. My life is your shield." The wind swept through the ruined street, carrying away the last traces of battle, and in that broken corner of a dying city, an alien warrior and a human survivor had forged something stronger than any armor, an unbreakable promise.